papers. Great to have you with us. Happy Easter.
Happy Easter.
Should we kick off with the Sunday Express, first of all? Bending the knee to China risks UK security. And this is coming from the opposition, the Conservatives, it was Rachel Reeves, isn't it? She's sort of saying, the Chancellor, look, we need to still be working very closely with China. She wants to float Shein, the fashion label, on the London stock market also. But the Tories are saying, no, bad idea.
It was an interview she did with The Telegraph on Saturday, where she said it would be very foolish not to engage with the second biggest economy in the world. And in the Sunday Express, we've got lots of, as you said, senior Tories are saying that actually this puts our national security at risk. Well, in the last few months, since the Labour government came into power, we've seen Keir Starmer cozying up to China. And to be honest, his whole China policy, in my opinion, has been a bit of a mess. We've seen Labour ministers flying to Beijing in open arms, talking up hundreds of millions of pounds in growth. And then quietly now they're preparing to label China, parts of China, a national security threat. It just seems a little bit confusing. And instead of being strategic, it almost seems a bit naive. And I think the case of British Steel perfectly encapsulates Labour's strategy and how sort of messy it is, because we had the government having to step in to basically stop a Chinese firm from running one of our most vital industry to the ground.
OK, we're going to just fix your mic, actually, Martina, because we've had some issues with that. But Bethany, some would say, over this story in particular, that actually it was the Conservative government that did that deal back in 2019 that handed over the steel plant to Chinese hands.
Yeah,
and so it's a bit fresh, potentially, to be now saying, look, you're bending the knee to China.
That's a really interesting political moment that we're having kind of time and time again when the Conservatives come in to criticise Labour, often on an issue where there is absolutely room for criticism.
Yes.
There is also room for Labour and critics of the Conservative Party to go, well, you set this deal. Conservative ministers are saying that, look, the Chinese firm Xingye actually were the only people bidding on the Scunthorpe steel plant. They didn't have a choice. But now here we are, and some, as you said, would say that they maybe laid some of that path.
Yeah. Where do you see this going, Martina?
Well, it's quite hard because I think they should be, we can't pretend this is going to be a long-term strategy, which is what the Labour government is saying. It's quite clear that right now they're prioritising growth over our national security, whether that would backfire. I mean, it's going to be us paying the price if that happens.
Yeah, completely. Let's move on now to the Sunday Telegraph. We've been covering the peace talks in France, Ukraine, top diplomats from Trump's team in Paris, and so many lines. It's hard to know where to start, really. But essentially, Zelensky saying that this surprise truce from Vladimir Putin has been undermined because there's been shellings in the last couple of hours on the Telegram social media posting that there have been quite significant shelling since this truce.
And this truce was meant to last from sundown yesterday all the way through to today, but as Zelensky has said, there were shellings quite soon after the truce was meant to come in force. I think this creates a really interesting backdrop, as you say, to the peace negotiations. We have senior politicians, including Keir Starmer, calling for a Russian ceasefire, but if Zelensky is correct and there are Russian shellings, it's actually really difficult to propose that ceasefire. A full and immediate one is what Keir Starmer is calling for. And that is something that almost seems a bit like a dream right now, if we can't even have a sort of one over a weekend.
Yeah, and the other conversation linked to this is whether President Trump decides to say, look, you guys, you're not really coming to the table with any kind of idea of peace, idea of a ceasefire, I'm out, which is very different from what we heard from him earlier this year when he said, I'm the guy that can do this for everyone. So what's your take on this?
My take on this, so first of all, what Putin has done, is seen as a naked attempt to curry favour with Donald Trump, who said he's going to walk away from the negotiations in just a few weeks at the end of April. What you're saying, it is right. I mean, we have seen Donald Trump sort of bullying Ukraine to come to the table and offer something significant. We haven't seen, he mentioned it like a month or so ago, that he said he could do real damage to the Russian economy. But so far it's just been that sentence, he hasn't really said anything really critical or anything to force Vladimir Putin to come to the table. And I wonder if that's what we're going to see in the next few weeks, because really that's the only thing that might force Putin to rethink and come to the peace negotiations with something real.
Yeah, and not forgetting that President Putin also went back on that truce, what was it, January 2023, did the same thing. So where this goes, we'll have to watch and wait and see. Can we move on to The Observer now? It's a really interesting story, front page again, Miliband in attack on Farage, net zero lies. Now, we know these two will never see eye to eye, but certainly they're having a bit of a spat now.
Absolutely. I think this row between Ed Miliband and Nigel Farage, sort of over net zero, sort of cuts to the heart of where the country is on this. Miliband says it's lies and nonsense to blame green policies for the crisis at British Steel. And he's right to say that energy security matters. But, you know, at the same time, we can't kid ourselves that energy prices in the UK are incredibly high. They're real. And they are absolutely squeezing companies like British Steel. And I think, and there was an interesting column in the Times on Saturday that was saying that there's about oil fields and actually the strategy that the Labour government has got over green policies. That there is a row within government on this, because there's some advisors that would like Keir Starmer to reissue licences in the North Sea, because this is, you know, we're talking about jobs, we're talking about bills, we're talking about fairness, and I think Nigel Farage is really tapping into something real for people, especially in the Red Wall, and that's what his strategy ahead of the local election is trying to be. We want to reindustrialise Britain, and we have to see if who's got the ear of the Prime Minister over this.
Yeah, Bethany, Nigel Farage, he's got the finger on the pulse of what people feel.
Well, polling does suggest that a lot of people are very happy with net zero. They're happy to pay for it in theory. In practice, everybody does want their bills to go down. And what Farage is very good at doing is speaking to kind of groups of people as sort of one of them. At least, you know, he embodies that position. Whether he is one of them is a whole nother discussion. But there is this real difference between Labour and Reform on this. And I think these lines from Ed Miliband are really interesting, because normally they're quite naturally small C Conservative. When it comes to their criticism of other party, they do sort of quips. But in terms of these big takedowns, we don't see it very regularly, so it's clearly a really big issue.
It's always been the elephant in the room, hasn't it, Reform, for both parties, actually. But you're right, this is the first time that we've really seen a very heavy-handed Ed Miliband.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the polls last week showed that Reform and Labour actually in the Red Wall are neck and neck, and this is something that is incredibly concerning to Labour strategists coming to the local elections and coming to the next general election. So they really feel they need to have, you know, the finger on the pulse on this, and have a strategy that can't just be like, you know, if we're losing our industries and our vital industries
and jobs,
this is going to be something that Reform will sweep in and advocate against.
OK, let's move on now to the Sunday Times. And Supreme Court victors tell of hate mail. A Mumsnet boss saying that she was blacklisted from having government ads. Martina.
Yes, so obviously we had the Supreme Court ruling last week, and we've had these comments to the women that took their case to the Supreme Court, and they're quite disgusting comments, actually. And I think people... it sort of encapsulates the toxicity around this debate. And then there was a protest yesterday in Parliament Square, and we saw statues being defaced. And I think we've seen it with Just Stop Oil. Vandalism never gets people on board. And I think this strategy is probably going to backfire when most people actually are behind the Supreme Court ruling, which just provides clarity in law. We haven't heard much from the government about this, and I think we should. But I think it's quite clear that this is just a legal ruling that clarifies the law, and that's what it is.
Yeah, it's not changing the law, Bethany, it's that clarification.
No, it's an explanation of how we use use the Equality Act in its current form. As you say, we've heard nothing from the government, and I think that's really interesting. We had these protests, of course, outside Parliament. Whether they would be different if we had a statement from Keir Starmer or someone else on the front bench, we won't know. But we also know there's a lot of turmoil within Labour, whether it's people feeling uncomfortable that there are no comments from the front bench, be that members or indeed politicians. And I think they could quell that. I think there is a point where Keir Starmer, where other parts of the Labour Party could make a statement, could make all sides feel more comfortable, feel like they're being heard, consultations are happening in how the law will be applied now that we have this clarification. But it's just interesting that that's not happening. Maybe it's because it's a long weekend, but that doesn't really feel
well,
like
they had enough time to respond to it when the ruling came in, but the fact that it was taken out of politicians' hands, essentially, and given to the courts really kind of says a lot, I think.
It doesn't. It's the reason why... So this was an appeal at the Supreme Court. The former iteration of this judgment was ruled the other way because the court said, look, this isn't for us, this isn't a judicial issue.
Yeah, we had Karen Smythe from the government on the show on Thursday, and she says it's up to individual bodies to come up with their set of rules with how they deal with it. So we'll see, this play out for days, maybe in years to come, in terms of what happens next. We do have just 1 minute left. Really briefly, can we talk about the front page of the Mail, Ministers in WhatsApp plot to defy trans ruling, obviously linked to the Supreme Court ruling. But I think widely speaking, WhatsApp groups aren't really the way we should be doing politics, potentially.
No, we had this issue for many years now. Look at what happened with the COVID inquiry and all those.
When are they going to learn?
I know. But yeah, it basically says that there are a few ministers in government that are not happy with the Supreme ruling and they want to do something about it, and they're organising on WhatsApp, and it's been leaked to the Mail. OK.
Just lastly, before we head to the weather, some Easter joy. Should we have a look at this Easter joy picture, but not much joy, apparently?
Yeah.
Not much joy for that young cat.
Yeah, 6 fluffy goslings are there, and there's even a cat that's joined in that doesn't look too happy. So there you are. It's a bunny cat, and just for the hell of it, just because we can, it's there. Bethany and Martina, thanks so much for that. Shall we take a look at today's weather?